Now folks, people often ask us if we're backing up here to get a running start at the hill. The answer is no. We have plenty of power to start from any point on our line. We back up here for two reasons. The first, mainly to give you the sighting of our high bridge from underneath, but also to give you a complete ride over our loop. You see our tracks extend only a few hundred feet beyond this point, just a little beyond the lower section of the bridge. And if we didn't do this, then we wouldn't be completing the loop. You see, the loop occurs on our railroad when we go up and or when we go under the bridge on these tracks, and then up and over these tracks will be on top of the bridge, thus completing the loop. If we didn't do this, then we'd have to call ourselves the Georgetown squiggly line, and that just doesn't sound as good. Now, if you take a good look at this bridge, it is a very near replica of the original. The original bridge was built in the years of 1883 and 1884 out of cast and wrought iron at a cost of $250,000. Quite a sum of money in the 19th century. Funny story about this bridge is that, the original bridge anyway, is that the gentleman that built it first installed it backwards, so it had to be completely torn down and rebuilt once again. Once the bridge was facing the right direction, the bridge was condemned once again for improper riveting, so again large sections of this bridge had to be taken out and replaced. Now, as the old saying goes, the third time is a charm, and the bridge ran without issue until the years of 1939 and 1941, when this original railroad was abandoned, and this bridge went along with it, which was sold for $600.
Nice.
Not a very good return on their investment. And I'm sure that the gentlemen that built this bridge 3 times weren't too happy to see their bridge go for that cheap. However, they will always be remembered as historical proof that men do not read directions. Now, if you take a good look at this bridge, it was built 100 years after the original, in the years of 1983 and 1984, out of modern heavy-duty steel at a cost of $1 million. Now, it is at least 5 times as strong as the original bridge, which is a good thing, because the old-timers would say that the original bridge would noticeably dip in the middle and sway when trains crossed over it. Now, we promise you folks that this modernized and very strong bridge will not sway as much. So in just a moment, we'll begin our uphill ride to Silver Plume. And for the uphill ride, I like to turn the microphone off so you can enjoy the natural sounds of Clear Creek Valley, and also because I like to let our steam locomotive number 40 do most of the talking. With that being said, folks, welcome aboard the Georgetown Loop Railroad. We hope you enjoy your ride.
особенно в маске.
Now folks, in just a moment, off to the left side of the train, we'll be passing the other train I spoke of in my safety. Now as we pass this train, please do not try to reach out to touch this train or high-five its passengers. Now folks, in just a moment, we'll be arriving at the Silver Plume Yard and Depot, just as trains did over 130 years ago. Here we are going to make a brief station stop so our conductor can hop off and uncouple the engine from the front, give it a 500-gallon drink of water, take it along the passing tracks to our right, and couple it into the rear end of the train for the downhill ride. Now this station stop will be about 7 to 10 minutes, and nobody will be getting off of this train as the station is closed currently. And this is not the mine tour stop. For those of you with the optional mine tour, it is the next station stop on the way back down the hill. With that being said, folks, welcome to Silver Plume, elevation 9,178 feet. Do not have a turntable at this railroad, so we have no means of rotating our engines or even our train. And when we get back down to Devil's Gate, we uncouple it and take it around to the front for the uphill ride. Now the railroad you're riding today is a reconstructed portion of the old Georgetown, Breckenridge, and Leadville Railroad, also known as the GB&L. The first mountain railroad in this area was the Colorado Central Railroad, which began in Denver in 1870. It came west following Clear Creek through the towns of Arvada, Golden, Idaho Springs, and finally reached Georgetown in 1877. Shortly thereafter, the GB&L was formed to build a connection that would come up through the town of Silver Plume, tunnel beneath the Continental Divide at Loveland Pass, and then drop downtown into the rich mining towns of Breckenridge and Leadville. However, after only building 5 miles west from Silver Plume to Graymont, now known as Bakerville, the parent company of the GB&L acquired a different line that made it to Breckenridge and Leadville from a different direction, going up through South Park instead. So this line was cut back to Silver Plume, and that means that this railroad never actually fulfilled its original purpose. Coming off to the left side of the train now, you can see Clear Creek tumbling down to the Georgetown Valley. Now this is very cold water because it's coming directly from snowmelt just a few miles west of here in Loveland Basin. Clear Creek gives our county its name, and Georgetown is the county seat. Clear Creek works its way out of the mountains near Golden and eventually meets the Platte River down in Denver. The Platte joins the Missouri, and then the Mississippi carries its water all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. That means that the water you're seeing today, in about 7 to 10 days, depending on the flow rate, will make it all the way to the Gulf. For those of you on board the train who are familiar with the beverage Coors beer, the Coors Brewery is in Golden, Colorado, and every single drop of beer that gets brewed is brewed with this Clear Creek water. Though only a stub and branch line from Denver, this railroad was very profitable in the early days, bringing miners, their families, and supplies to the mountain communities, and taking the rich gold and silver ore back to Golden and Denver to be processed. This continued until 1893 when the Sherman Silver Purchase Act was repealed and the price of silver dropped so low, mining for it was no longer profitable. At that time, tourism was taking over as the main source of revenue for the railroad, and as the fame of the Georgetown Loop spread throughout the country and even the world, thousands of people came to ride on what was considered a scenic and engineering marvel of the 19th century. It was very fashionable to hop aboard a train in the morning in Denver, ride up over the loop, have a picnic lunch in Silver Plume, and be back in Denver in time for supper. Between 1905 and 1918, many tourists continued their ride aboard the Argentine Central Railroad, which offered an additional ride from Silver Plume on 7% grades to the mining town of Waldorf and onto the tip of Mount McClellan at an elevation of 13,500 feet. Special Shay-type geared steam locomotives pulled on the very short-lived rail line due to their ability to climb steep grades, and that line was often called the Stairway to the Stars. The heavy tourism continued on until the early 1920s, and then advancements in automobiles made it easier for tourists to explore the mountains on their own. Passenger business began to dwindle, and in 1927 the railroad discontinued passenger service. The railroad continued to run a couple of freight trains a week for several more years, but even about the late 1930s, that business was so poor they filed for abandonment of the railroad. Between 1939 and 1941, all the rails and bridges from Silver Plume East were torn up and sold for scrap. This included the entire line down through Idaho Springs, as well as the Central City branch. And in 1951, the U.S. Highway 6 tunnel route was completed through Clear Creek Canyon, following a good portion of the railroad grade. And in the 1960s, the State Highway Department began planning its interstate highway, also known as I-70, which was supposed to be built right up the middle of this valley. Had this occurred, it would have destroyed our railroad grade, and all the rich mining history would have been lost forever. So the Colorado Historical Society pitched in and petitioned the Highway Department to move their interstate highway to the side of Republican Mountain. That petition was successful, and there you see it today. Now, the Historical Society began to rebuild the railroad starting in Silver Plume in 1973. Narrow gauge train operations were still ongoing by the Lindsay and Rosa Ashby Company on their Central City branch. And with their expertise in narrow gauge train operations, a new era was about to begin on the loop. They were successful in getting the U.S. Navy Seabees to offer their services in rebuilding the grade and track. And the Union Pacific Railroad also donated 3 miles of 70-pound rail from the abandoned line. Throughout the 70s, the Ashby's ran passenger service along the limited line so passengers could chart the progress of the reconstruction. And in 1983 and 1984, the new High Bridge was completed, and in 1985, the lower tracks and facilities below were completed in time for the 1985 season. The completely rebuilt Georgetown Loop Railroad has been in operation ever since. Now that whistle warning is for this curve that we call the high fill. This is one of the most scenic portions of our line. After we clear the trees to the right side, you can look down the valley and see the High Bridge, and also with a view of Georgetown beyond that. To the left of the train now is a good shot of our steam locomotive number 40. Now this bowl-shaped area to the left side of the train is called the ballpark. You see, in the early days there was no trees in this valley. It had all been cut down for building cabins, mine structures, and for firewood. So the miners and settlers of the mountain communities built themselves a baseball diamond and picnic area here, and often enjoyed the weekends watching ball games and having picnics. Perhaps they were the original Colorado Rockies baseball team, but I'm not sure how they compare to today's Rockies. You see, they were playing in the minor leagues. Now our railroad, like the original GB&L, is narrow gauge. That means that the rails are only 3 feet apart. Most railroads in our country use standard gauge, like Union Pacific and Amtrak, where the rails are 4 feet 8.5 inches apart. Narrow gauge was far more practical for mountain railroading because the smaller cars are able to navigate sharper curves like the ones we're coming around. It also meant that the cars could be lighter, which was much better for the engine to handle on steep grades. We're now entering the steepest portion of our line. This is called the ladder track, and this is a descending 4% grade, which means for every 100 feet of forward travel, we drop 4 feet in elevation. As a reference, for those of you who are at the very rear of the train right now, you are about 12 feet higher than the engineer and fireman in the 40. Now this narrow track also meant that the roadbed would be narrower, which was good when building through terrain such as this field of giant boulders we're about to pass through. In the 1880s, there was no machinery to move these giant rocks in order to build track, so they had to hand drill them, pack them with black powder and nitroglycerin charges, and blast them into small enough pieces to be moved by hand or horse. Now who do you think had the honors of lighting the fuse and running away? Well, only the most agile of us, of course, children. Children between the ages of 7 and 14 were employed by the railroad companies known as powder monkeys. And due to their natural speed and agility, they would be the ones to light the fuse and run away before a sea of granite came raining down upon them. They were paid an honest wage of 50 to 75 cents a day, which in the late 1800s, that was actually pretty good money. As we enter this curve, we'll be crossing Clear Creek, the little stream you saw as you left Silver Plume. Now this is a great photo opportunity off to the left side, but I do suggest holding your cameras very high because this picturesque bridge loves to photobomb. I know what it's like. As we continue around this curve, we'll be entering a cut in the mountainside. As we pass through the cut, notice the rock retaining walls on either side. These walls were built in the 1880s by the Cornish miners without the use of mortar or cement. That means that these walls are being held up by friction and gravity alone. This method is known as dry stoning or dry stacking, and these walls have been standing for well over 100 years, which is a real testimonial to those workmen. Having required little to no maintenance over time, the retaining bolts you see in the walls were added about 20 or so years ago to ensure their stability, because at this point we are just beneath I-70. As we continue around this curve, we'll be arriving at the Everett and Lebanon Silver Mine Tour stop. For those of you with the optional mine tour and wristbands, this is where you get off to begin your guided tour.
I recommend next time.
Now would be a great time to check and make sure you have all of your personal belongings before departing the train. Now these mine tours are sold out for the foreseeable future, and you cannot purchase any tickets here, so if you do not have a mine tour ticket, please do not get off the train.
They're not identical. $20 for the whole package. Definitely check it out. It includes two chains on the back. All right. Give me a quick hand and look at it. Did we take photographs today?
Thank you. We don't need.
No thanks.
Thank you.
Did we take photographs? Are you interested in looking at your guys' beautiful faces? Word.
Now folks, the brakes are set and the ramp is down, so if you do have the optional mine tour, this is your stop. Please be sure to get your wristbands ready so our mine tour guides can count you off.
Pass on that?
Yeah, thanks.
No worries, man. Definitely enjoy the rest of the train ride. I can do reprints if you guys are interested. $20 for the package. That includes one package is a 5x7 and 2 keychains. Doing just one? Absolutely. Which one are you grabbing? Are you grabbing the extra one?
Now folks, all the mine tour passengers have been offloaded, and we are about to continue our ride downhill. So if everyone could please be seated and get comfortable, we will be on our way.
If you guys want an extra one, I can make another print of that one. Alright, definitely enjoy the rest of the train ride. Thanks, folks.
Now folks, if you look off to the left side of the train, you can see the folks have just gathered down the path in front of a small wooden portal in the mountainside. Now this portal is the entrance to the Everett silver mine. In the heyday of the mining era, this upper Clear Creek Valley produced about $200 million worth of silver, and that was in the 19th century. That would equate to about $5.6 billion today. All of this silver production earned Georgetown its nickname as the Silver Queen of the Rockies, second only to Leadville as the Silver King. Now people often ask us if there still is silver and gold in these mountains, and the answer is actually yes. If you look off to the left side of the train now, just above I-70, you'll notice those bluish smears in the mountainside. Now those blue smears are actually the outer peripheries of silver veins. You see silver forms with lead and galena, and that's what's giving it that bluish tint. Now the reason that those veins of silver are still there is the same reason why the highway department didn't mine them when they found them in the 60s. That silver is of such low grade that digging it up would cost more money than it's actually worth. Now that whistle warning does mean that we are about to enter the clearing of Hall Tunnel, and that does mean that we are about to pass that other train again, but off to the right side. Now as we pass the train, please do not try to reach out to touch the train or high-five its passengers. As we pass through this clearing, we'll be passing the site of the Hall Tunnel. The stone line trench we'll be passing over is the entrance to the tunnel, and the old rusty machine you see on the building foundation just behind the train we're passing is one of the old Ingersoll and Rand air compressors used to power the jackhammers. Now this tunnel started out to be a transportation tunnel through Leavenworth Mountain so that the ore from the mines on the south side of the mountain could be brought through the tunnel and loaded on here onto the train. However, they had the worst of luck. As they kept digging, they encountered one of the richest silver veins in the entire canyon, causing them to lose interest in digging the tunnel and to mine the silver instead. Now it is unclear the actual amount of silver that came out of the hull, but it must have been very profitable. For that mine outlasted the abandonment of this railroad, it outlasted the repeal of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, it outlasted the Great Depression, and it even outlasted World War I. That mine finally closed its doors in 1942. To the downhill side of the train now, you can see the lower tracks of the loop. Now we were on those tracks earlier as we left Devil's Gate, and we'll be on those tracks again in just a few minutes. For those of you who are not familiar with the story of the loop, it was the surveyor's answer from getting a railroad from Georgetown to Silver Plume. You see, the two towns are only 2 miles apart, but different elevation by over 600 feet. So if the track would have been laid straight up the floor of this valley, the grade would have exceeded 6%, which is far too steep for any normal railroad operation. If you look over to I-70, that is a grade of about 6.5 to 7%, and you can see semi-trucks hauling just one trailer have quite a hard time making it up that hill. Could you imagine a small steam locomotive hauling 9 loaded freight cars up that hill? It definitely wouldn't be able to make the trip. So the surveyors laid out a route that doubled back and looped over itself. This held the grade at about 3.5%, but it increased the distance between the two towns to 4.5 miles by rail. At the time the loop was built, there were only 4 or 5 locations in the world where railroads used a loop as a means of gaining elevation, but in all cases but ours, that lower section of track was always in a tunnel where it could not be seen. In our case, everything is out in the open with the upper track crossing the lower on the spectacular curved bridge. The early settlers of this valley named the narrow mouth of this canyon the Devil's Gate, because as there was no trees in this valley as they were all clear-cut, the wind would howl down the valley so loud that it sounded like the devil was howling himself. So it was only natural for us to name our bridge the Devil's Gate Bridge. Does mean that we are about to go back out on the Devil's Gate Bridge. For those of you who are nervous about going over the bridge again, I do have a suggestion for you. If you look down onto the floor of the car you're sitting in, you are bound to find a small pebble. Pick that pebble up and roll it in between your fingers, and that way you may feel a little bolder.
Wow.
Now this bridge is 300 feet long, about the same as an American football field, and has an 18.5 degree curve. This bridge may look level to you, but it is built on a slight grade of just more than 2%, which means that the end we start from is 6 feet higher than the opposite end. Once we get onto the bridge, if you look off to the left side, you'll see the Devil's Gate boarding area where you folks boarded the train today, and off to the right is the town of Georgetown. And if you're not afraid of heights, if you look straight down, Clear Creek will be 100 feet below you. The lower tracks of the loop will be 75 feet below.
Rodeo King, days gone by. That's my prime, no money I see. So to stay on this circuit, I'm hopping this train.
you look off to the left end of the bridge, just by the bike path, you'll see a small stone monument. This monument was placed by the Colorado Historical Society in 1945 to commemorate the original Georgetown Loop Railroad and High Bridge, not knowing that about 39 years later, that same Historical Society would completely rebuild this portion of the railroad, and it would be in operation ever since. For today is the Georgetown Loop Railroad number 40. She is an oil-fired steam locomotive built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in September of 1920. Shortly after she was built, she was sent down to the international railways of Central America, where she held freight and passenger service throughout the countries of Guatemala and El Salvador. She mainly hauled freight service, such as sugarcane and bananas, before she came back stateside in the 1970s, where she operated a few other railroads other than ours, including the Durango and Silverton Railroad, and even the White Pass and Yukon up in Alaska. Ultimately, though, she did come back here, and it went through a major restoration, which finished about a year and a half ago, and she's been operating very well with us ever since. Now, if you folks do the math, if she was built in September of 1920, and in about a month and a half, it'll be September of 2020. That means that this September, this steam locomotive will be turning 100 years old. Now, shortly you folks will hear a nationally recognized railroad crossing signal, which consists of 2 long, 1 short, and 1 long blast on the whistle. This is also Morse code for the letter Q. Now, I'm sure you're wondering what the letter Q has to do with the railroading, and the answer is absolutely nothing. You see, back in Victorian England, old ships and trains that had Queen Victoria on board would use this signal to indicate that the Queen was in their presence and that they therefore had the right-of-way. Now, we don't use it here in America because we have a monarchy, and I'm quite sure none of the princes or princesses are on board this train right now. So we use it because trains have the right-of-way when going over a path or a road and will not be stopping. Now, this is standard for all railroads in our country, so always be sure to stop, look, and listen, because these trains will not be stopping for you. We're now passing over Clear Creek. This is the 4th and final time we'll be passing over Clear Creek. We've come a little over a mile as the crow flies from the Silver Plume Depot. We've used about 3.5 miles of track to get here, and we've also dropped about 500 feet in elevation. Open the doors of the biggest river, and I'll no other man to do. Now, that was a warning you just heard does mean that we are approaching the Devil's Gate station, the eastern end of our line. That also does mean that this train ride is unfortunately coming to an end. We want to thank you for riding with us today, and that you'll hope to come back and ride with us again soon. The Georgetown Loop Railroad and Colorado State Patrol urge all of you to drive safely as you continue your Colorado travels. Now would also be a perfect time to check and make sure that you have all of your personal belongings before departing the train.
I do.